What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Dadish. This week, we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine who is a teacher and also is in the process of starting and running a business of his own. So, it goes into depth talking about what's required to have balance and structure in his life that helps him maintain everything. So, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully, we'll see you next week. Hello, everyone. This is the second episode of Dad Ish with your host, Ish. Today, I have my friend Corey here. He's a full time teacher, he's a husband, and most importantly, he is a father and entrepreneur. So, he's a very busy man. So, first off, I just want to say thank you for joining us today and just see how you're doing. Check it in. How's everything going with you?
Um, Everything's good. I'm glad you asked me to be on this. This is, I've never been on a podcast before, so getting to talk about, dad stuff is always great because I love being a father.
That's awesome. That's good to hear, and as do I. So anytime we get opportunity to speak about it, I think it's good. Get the message out there for everyone, let everyone know, really what it's all about. So the first question I have here for you is, like I mentioned, I mean, you're an entrepreneur, so you're working full time, you have your
Mhm.
obligations with your spouse and work, and then also trying to get your business off the ground. How do you balance everything on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, sometimes I don't. I don't always get to balance it perfectly, but I just do my best to take care of the little things so that the big things can then be much easier later on down the road. Like I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning because that's the only time I can work out. And then that's where I film all my content to try to get people to come to my gym.
Mhm.
So that's the only time I can do it because my son is asleep and my wife is asleep. And then I have to worry about being too loud. So I have to, it can't drop any weights. I have to carry it down.
Mhm.
And then start my day, go through the whole day and, deal with kids, other people's kids. And, I am tired at the end of the day for sure. And then I come home and I make sure that I do the dishes and I make sure I try to do as much laundry as I can.
Mhm.
And I make sure that Jace is my son happy and is fed and, is not hurting himself. So there are times where like I slack on trying to juggle all three.
Mhm.
Like sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and just say, you know what, sleep sounds a lot better right now. I'm just going to go back
Yeah.
to sleep, wake up and get ready for work and like do the bare minimum at work because I do not feel like doing anything today. And then come home and do as much as I can with my son and then look at all the stuff that needs to be done and say, it's time for bed. So I don't
So,
always
Mhm.
balance it out, but for majority of the time I do. And I'm actually trying to work to build better
Mhm.
habits to balance it out.
And that's what I was gonna ask you. So, with my father-in-law, one thing I've kind of picked up from him was that he was real big in actually doing handwritten notes. So he would make a note, and put it somewhere like, "Hey, be sure you need to do, XYZ today, or make sure you get to that tomorrow." So that's another question. I mean, how do you establish your habits and make sure that you are obtaining those goals that you need to complete?
So recently I've been reading, I don't know if you've heard of it, but Atomic Habits.
Okay.
Pretty good read. It's teach me a lot about what we as humans view, our habits as and
Mhm.
how it works.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily like you're hacking your body, but you're using the neural pathways that are already set up in your brain to sort of try to set up new habits or better habits and get rid of your
Right.
old one. So there are things that I try to implement in there. Like one of them is like a morning checklist. Is there anything bad that you normally do in the morning? Is there anything good? And what I mean bad is like, is that wasteful time?
Okay.
And one of my biggest ones is even though I get up at like 4:30 in the morning, what is one of the first things that most people do when they wake up?
On the phone.
They grab our phone and start looking at social media or
Mhm.
whatever. And I am notorious for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in my checklist, that's a negative. The positive is that I got up to work out, but that's the biggest negative because sometimes I start my workout late. So there are some things that I need like physical in my face
Mhm.
thing let me know that the stuff that I'm doing is not quite aligning with what I want to be doing. And then there are other things that I'm still trying to work in where it's just all mental, like, oh, every time you go to take a shower in the morning, just start scrubbing the toilet because you have to wait for the water to heat up anyways.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, makes sense. And so how does your wife I guess, does she assist you with this? Does she admire the effort that you're putting in? How does that work out?
She is actually the one that, pretty much tells me what to do, actually. So, not that I can't take care of myself, but she runs a pretty tight ship.
Right.
And that, like, if anything, little thing is out of place, she starts to get stressed out, and it just compiles there. And so
Right.
I try to do whatever she says that she needs me to get done, or that I need to do for her. Um, right now, my main thing that I do every day after work and at the end of the night is I do all of the dishes in our sink, and my wife does all of our laundry.
Yeah, it's even trade off. I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, it definitely helps, kind of having that team. So when my wife gives me that, that honey do list, I mean, that definitely helps out instead of like, I picked up this corner and she's like, I don't want that corner, I wanted this corner, and I'm like, all right, whatever, just tell me next time and I'll do it. So,
Right.
so I'm with you there. Um, so the next question I have here for you is, you mentioned yourself, you love being a father, and there has been times where we've hung out and I've heard you talk about your father, and the way you speak about him, it shows me that you have a lot of respect for him. So did you gain, I guess, knowledge on how to be a good father from him?
Oh, yes, for sure. My dad did everything to make
Mm.
sure we had a good time. On the days that he's shift worker. He works in a chemical power plant. So he'd have like 7 days on, 7 days off. He'd work for
Wow.
5 days and be off for two, and then work for like four and then be off for eight.
Wow.
So
Mhm.
my mom would drop us off at daycare growing up or drop us off at school. And then on the days that my dad was off, the teachers could tell that my dad was taking us to school because our hair was fixed, our clothes was all nice and smooth and pressed.
Mhm.
Whereas my mom was, not that she was a bad mom or anything, but she would just let us go however. And my
Right.
dad just wanted to make sure we looked our best when we went to school.
Mhm.
So I learned, make sure my hair is fixed, make sure my clothes looks good. So now, even now, when I see put on a shirt and I'm like, oh, there's a little couple of wrinkles in there, I'm not going to wear that shirt today. Even going to work now as an adult, which
Right.
already you should do, but it makes me think of like when my dad was dressing me.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, he was just a great dad. He took care of us, he protected us. There had been a couple times where, some shady people had approached us and he stood up and protected us, and nothing ever really happened and never got further than them like coming to ask a couple of questions, and then my dad told them to back off, and they left us alone.
That's awesome. I mean, that's awesome to have, that example to show you, how to lead, how to provide, how to be, the best father that you can be. So that's awesome, and that's just definitely a blessing to have. Um, so the next question I have for you. So your son, he is about a year and a half. Is that right?
There, yeah, he's pretty close to a year and a half.
Okay. So so say for a new father, when you first find out that you're gonna have a kid, and you start having to make these changes with your life, and then now your child is here and it's already been, close to a year and a half. Were the expectations what you thought they would be? Was there anything different?
So you know, when before he was born, obviously I don't have any really like, and it sounds terrible to say, but I didn't have any like real attachment
Oh, well,
before,
okay.
obviously, because I'm not the one growing a new
Right.
person in their
Mhm,
belly.
mhm,
And so for a while, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna be a dad. It's gonna be cool. But there wasn't anything like, like set in stone for
mhm,
me, really, even
mhm.
though I could visibly see my wife's belly getting bigger and bigger each month. It wasn't until he was born and that I got to hold him and like play with him as he got older that it was like, I, this is the best thing that could have ever happened to me in my life. And it's like a switch that gets turned on. And everything that you had dreamed of before pretty much takes a back seat to now
Right.
being a father and being able to do whatever needs to be done to make sure that your kid is safe and is happy and healthy and just doesn't need anything and is always felt protected. So basically they become the forefront
Mhm.
of everything. So like any dreams that I had before, they're still there. They're just, he takes precedent over all
Right.
that. So
Yeah, and
that's like probably the main thing that changed was it wasn't like an instant connection until
mhm,
he was born. and then I got to hold him and like make sure he was safe and okay, and that's when everything changed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can definitely, you know, agree with you when it comes to that because for myself, you know, I always wanted to be a father. I didn't know what was involved with it though. I didn't know about the feeding every 2 hours and and the burping and and the throw up and like sometimes you get constipated. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just thought, you have a kid, they come out and then they're rolling around and watching TV. I didn't know anything, about the baby phase. And people ask me all the time, like, oh, do you want to have another one? And I don't. I don't. I'm done because I have the two. I don't want to go back to where they can't tell you what they want or what they need.
Mhm.
It's hard. You're trying to figure things out and try to be the best little mind reader that you can be. And now that they're at an age where they can wipe themselves in the restroom, it's like it's awesome. So yeah, so I know what you mean. And then as far as like the goals, I mean, definitely, I mean, my whole life shifted to, actually, I never even thought about going back. I went to school as far as upper education. I went for a couple of years after high school, and I thought, hey, this isn't for me. I'd rather do something else. And then the second that we found out, it's just like something switched. My wife was like, "Hey, like it's time," and I'm like, "You know what? You're right." And it's been a journey since, and I wouldn't change it because I do it for them. So I
Mhm.
mean, your life changes, your goals change, and it's only for the better. I mean, it makes you a better person when you can be the provider and that person that you need to be for your family. So I get it. Um, and the other thing I was asking you about, so I know earlier you were talking about how you check your phone in the mornings. Do you ever get those alerts about how much screen time you have?
Um, no, I don't because I haven't set that up yet for my phone. But there was a point in time where my wife was like, "Hey, let's check to see how long we are on, our phones throughout the day." And when she looked at mine, she was like, "How are you on your phone that much if you're at work all day?" And I was like, "Well, there are days where we have testing,
Mhm.
and I literally just sit there and watch these kids work on their iPad in
Right,
silence.
right.
So that's the most time I'm on my phone."
Yeah, I mean, I feel you. So the other thing I was gonna ask you about is, so like you mentioned, I mean, you work out, you're trying to get this gym started up, so I consider you an athlete. Your wife is definitely an athlete. So you guys are very, structured and strict with, your workout routines. So does that roll over into your parenting as far as like the diet that your child has?
So not, I mean, sort of. After Jace was born, and he was fine with just having formula because we couldn't make enough milk over here, so it was formula. And then he started to eat like we did all purees for him, like we made
Mhm.
them ourselves.
Okay.
We didn't buy any store-bought ones.
Hmm.
Made them all from scratch. Every single meal that he had that was a puree was all from scratch. Um, it wasn't until he started to get older and wanted to eat like real foods that we started really looking into like what is in food out there. Like we're big fitness people, and
Hmm.
we already know like, this food is a better option than this food. This type of fat is better than this fat. You want to look for this type of protein and things like that. But it wasn't until that Jay started to show interest in eating
Hmm.
adult food,
Right.
air quotations there, just regular food, that we started thinking about like, okay, well, what really is in our food? It went
Hmm.
so far as we downloaded, there's an app called Yucca,
Okay.
Yuka, and it has like a carrot, I think. So it looks very similar to like the Instacart app, but it's not. And what it is you go in and you can scan any barcode out there
Mm.
for a food, and it
Okay.
will spit out any additives that have like adverse effects,
Oh
or
wow.
there are like long-term effects to them. And so anytime we buy him food, we're
Mhm.
scanning it to see like what it is. And
Mhm.
sometimes it'll come back and it'll say it's poor, and you can see why it was poor. And most of the time it's just like too much sodium.
Okay.
But one of the things that we've also shied away from is like all those artificial dyes,
Right.
like red 40 and yellow
Right.
5. So he doesn't have any of that. And we don't have any of that stuff anymore either.
Mhm. Well,
So
completely
that's,
understandable.
yeah, that's really like the biggest change in what he eats. And also in that we are very structured as adults, in that, we get up at a certain time, we go to work, we come back home from a certain time. This is when we eat dinner, we eat lunch at a certain time at work, we do a workout before work or after work at a certain time.
Mhm.
Jace is on pretty much a schedule as well. He gets
Mhm.
up at 7 o'clock in the morning. He has a Nest light, which is like a sound machine, and we have it
Mhm.
set up to when it's time for him to wake up. Even if he's already awake, it turns green, and that's when he decides that he. That's when we let him know that, hey, you're about to get up. You may just be sitting there rolling around with your eyes open, but you should not be getting up until that light
Right.
turns green. And then we start his day. He goes to daycare for a majority of the day. I pick him up after school. We come home, play outside for a little bit. Once it hits 5:30, it's like, hey, bud, we got to go inside and start your dinner.
Mhm.
Have dinner. And then once it hits like 6:30, it's like, hey, it's time for your bath. And then his sound machine turns on at 7. So as soon as it's 7, I was like, hey, we got to go brush your teeth and it's time
Mhm.
to go to sleep. Like, you need to go to bed. And then he sleeps from 7 p.m. to 6:30. We'll just say 7 a.m. He's rolling
Mhm.
around for like 30 minutes. So he
Right.
gets like 12 hours of sleep. So he's
Yeah.
pretty structured. We have a routine for him.
That's awesome. Yeah. At first, because we started off, and once the baby was born, we kind of got them older, where we building a routine. And at first, we didn't have a routine at all. We were just kind of like, hey, let's just be laid back, and it wasn't working. It was really difficult with the baby kind of just waking up whenever.
Mhm.
You feel like they don't know when it's daytime, when it's nighttime, and it just wasn't a healthy situation with sleeping and then trying to go to work, trying to hold a conversation with someone. You just couldn't because your brain is fried. So it came to the point where, like, hey, you know what, we need to have structure, we need to have a routine. And once we did that, it was night and day. So
Amen.
I understand completely that some people, they just don't do that. And by all means, I mean, that's on them, and that's, I'm glad they have something that works for them. But for this household, no, we are on a structure. We know what time you wake up, we know what time you go to sleep, we know what time we eat dinner. And them knowing what to do and when to do it, it helps so much, especially now that they're older and they have homework. They know as soon as we walk in the door, you sit down, you do your homework, I'll make dinner, and it just builds from there. And so there's no question of, well, what do I do now? What do I do next? It's just, you already know what there is to do. Let's go get it done. So definitely relate. Moving on. So I know a few months ago there was a little bit of a health scare that took place with your son when he was admitted to the hospital. So I just want to know if you could just maybe shine some light and tell us a little bit about that, and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so we started noticing that he wasn't, feeling well. He was very sluggish. He's not as happy, his happy self, where he's always cheerful and laughing. He was very like reserved and didn't really want to move a whole lot, didn't really feel like eating, and we had no idea what was going on. And so one Friday, my wife doesn't have work on Friday, so she stayed home with him, and she was just like, "Hey, I don't think he's feeling well. Um, I kind of want you to stay home, but if you want to go to work, you can." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll go to work, and you just let me know if anything happens."
Mhm.
So I'm going about my day, and all of a sudden, in the middle of like halfway through my work in one of my classes, I get a phone call from her, and she's like, "You need to come home now." And all I hear is him crying in the background and screaming, and my wife sounds like she's in tears. And I said, "Okay, I'm leaving." So I hung up the phone, called the office, and I was like, "Hey, I need somebody to come take over this class. I can't be
Mhm.
here right now. There's
Mhm.
a big situation going on at home with my son. I need to go home." And when I got home, my wife had put him down for a nap, and he she told me that he had just like thrown up all over her.
Mhm.
Like, he like slowly crawled to her and like laid on her leg and then just threw up.
Yeah.
And then he just went limp after that. So my wife, that's when she called me and she was like freaking out.
Mhm.
And so then finding out all that information afterwards, I was terrified. Um, but we put him down for a nap because she calmed him down. And one of the things that we were worried about as well is that he woke up from a full night's sleep with a dry diaper.
Yep.
And that's
It's a
never a
sign.
good,
Right.
yeah, that's basically dehydration.
Mhm.
So we said if he wakes up from this nap and his diaper isn't wet, like he pretty much hadn't peed since the overnight and then into
Mhm.
the next day. And as we said, if he wakes up from this nap and his diaper is dry, we're going to the ER. And sure enough, He woke up from his nap, dry. All right, let's pack it up. Let's go to the ER. And we were in the ER for like 12 hours. And I don't know if your kids have ever gotten an IV stuck in their arm, but it is the most terrible thing to have to
Mm,
experience because your kid doesn't know what's going on when
right.
they're that young. It was like what, not even a year yet at that point.
Wow.
So he was just terrified.
Hmm.
And you can't tell him like, hey, it's okay. They're just trying to help you. He just feels like, owie, this hurts.
Right.
And these people are being mean to me for no reason. I don't
Hmm.
like these people. I get a weird vibe from them. I don't know who they are. These are just strangers.
Right.
So yeah, it was pretty tough. It was scary, and we just kept saying like, what do we need to do? And they were like, we're just going to keep pumping fluids into him. And I don't want that experience for anyone.
Right.
And he just was very sluggish and he was very scared. Even when we got into the room, it was almost like he was in a little prison cage because that's what it looks like.
Mm.
So it looks like he's locked up, and he's wearing
Mm.
the hospital gown, and then
Oh
he can't
man.
sleep correctly because he's
Yeah.
not in his home, and we don't have I mean, I think we brought a sound machine eventually because we just left with whatever we had with us.
Right. So how
So
long? How long were you guys in?
we were there for probably, I want to say 3 days.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that
3 days.
that hurts to hear. I bet that was not a fun experience. It has to be very traumatic, especially how's your wife handling everything?
Uh, well, obviously she was way more distraught than I was because she had the whole experience of like
Hmm.
him leaning over on her leg, throwing up, and then going limp. And at that point, you think like my kid is dying.
Oh man.
So it was very scary for her as well, even more so, especially because she has like this like deep primal connection with him in that what he is made from is actually from her.
Mm. Right.
Like she put him together and he was inside of her for, you know, a little less than 9 months. And then to see him in this state is just heartbreaking.
Yeah. I mean, how could it not be? And so since he has made a full recovery, correct?
Yes, he is perfectly fine
Awesome.
now. He's laughing. He's walking around saying "dada." He's saying "mama." He's trying to say "bus," but he just says "buh," and he always forgets the S. And he loves seeing airplanes in the sky, and he says "wow."
That's
So,
awesome. That's really good to
mm,
hear. So before I wrap this up, I want to ask you a question that I think I'm going to start asking everyone that I have on here. So,
okay.
do you have any advice for a new father or someone that's expecting to be a father shortly?
My advice would be whatever you thought it was being a father, like whatever inclination or idea that you thought like this is what it's going to be like being a father. I'm going to be this way, this way, this way with my kid. Basically, once that kid shows up, just toss that all out the window. Like it's up to you to decide
Mhm.
and figure out on your own, like how are you going to father your kid or how are you going to parent your kid? How are you going to structure their lives and things like that? Like one of the things that I drastically changed was I was not very religious, going into my marriage. We didn't even get married in a church. We got married by one of my wife's best friends. And it wasn't until Jace was born that I started to seek more of a relationship with God. And I just feel like it might not be for everyone, but it's definitely something that every father out there should at least try to consider
Mhm.
because then from the teachings from the Bible and following in God's word, then it just helps them develop a good sense of morals and have like a good role model that they can look up to. If they say like, "Oh, I see my father doing all this,"
Right.
then I should be doing the same thing. Like he's honoring mom, which is his wife. He's treating her with respect. He's protecting her. He's also not, out there doing any like bad things to people. He's always looking out for others
Mhm.
and he's always protecting us. So it's just that would be one thing that I would say, at least advice. If like if you didn't already have a relationship with God and you were sort of thinking about it, then I would just say go all in for that.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
other than that, just figure it out. basically figure it out as you go.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say once again, thank you for showing up. Thank you for answering these questions, and hopefully this gets to the right audience where someone who's looking for that advice, they can get some answers here. So, thank you, and that's gonna wrap up our episode. All right.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was good talk.
All right, you got it. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Next week we got a very special guest coming in, gonna give us some information about fatherhood. Good friend of mine who has some older kids and also some younger kids, so he gives us some details about what that's like. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.